This initial chapter is a pretty fundamental work, so I'm going to be spending just a little bit more time on it. It was written by Max Weber, an early 20th century German sociologist, an academic, a politician, and briefly an officer in the German military during World War I. He wrote about the rationalization of society during the Industrial Revolution, offering the organizational design of the Bureau as an example. To justify this example, Bureau gives a pretty convincing argument that a model bureaucracy, more formally known as an ideal type bureaucracy, is a rational design, that there's benefits to it. Despite what business undergrads are told and the word ideal being thrown around, Weber's description of bureaus is not prescriptive. Weber doesn't prescribe the Bureau as a perfect organization. Rather, he's just describing what characteristics are present in bureaus and that it is a rational design compared to the patrimonial organizations of yesteryear, which in his case would have been pre-industrial age organizations and colonial establishments. So I won't be delving into the sociology of bureaus, much in the way Weber did, and the relationships with society at large, because I'm not a sociologist. Rather, I'll be just parlaying the internal characteristics of bureaus according to Weber. And while I'm distilling the presentation of this particular text, I've left the order and the substance of all its content here. So what are characteristics that he observed? Well, that's a good question, me. One, bureaus are of fixed and official jurisdictions, which are generally ordered by rules and regulations. There's regular activities that bureaus are required to perform. Officials are regulated in how they perform those duties. And thus, these duties must be performed by people with regulated qualifications. This contrasts patrimonial organizations that might assign personal trustees with the latitude to perform tasks how they see fit. So that's point one. Point two, there's an organizational hierarchy of offices with superordinate offices supervising subordinate ones. 3, the management of the Bureau is written down. This allows for the separation of the incumbent of a position and the position itself. The equipment, rights, authority, and processes are owned by the Bureau rather than an individual. The principle of written rules that allows for separation of the Bureau's office from the private office of the individual. 4, there's a specialization of labor, which presupposes expert training for specific roles. 5, in fully developed offices, employees are full-time. 6, there's an extensive system of internal rules to manage the office. Those are the characteristics of the Bureau, of the organization. That influences the position of the official, which Weber kind of somewhat redundantly also describes in this text. 1, working within a bureaucracy is a vocation. Incumbents are they're employees. They do not have the right to exploit their positions for rent or personal revenue, which would have been more common in patrimonial or colonial organizations. Their position does not rely on their personal charisma or authority. In the past, there would have been personal loyalty to a specific official, a specific army commander, for example. But in modern bureaus, that's not quite the case. People are more loyal to the position or to the organization rather than the individuals in it. But while those people are in that position, they're generally held in high social self-esteem, according to Weber. This is partly because being in that position relies on having recognized qualifications, maybe a university degree, and performing well at work, and not because of nepotism or favoritism. It's also because officials are there to provide a function and not to extract personal profit for themselves. Bureaucrats, according to Weber, are appointed by a higher authority and they're not elected. I won't get into too deep on Weber's description of democracy, but it can be summarized fairly accurately by saying democracy simply doesn't work. In this case, Weber says it's because the voters can't have perfectly informed opinions about professional qualifications, and they rely more on the favoritism of a particular candidate, albeit en masse by the voter base, instead of one particular authority figure. Positions are normally held for life, especially in public offices. There's a presupposed tenure and job security. The protection against arbitrary removal allows officials to work diligently regardless of whether there's favoritism against them by a superior office. There's legal avenues for dismissal, but those are largely to ensure that there remains a separation from the individual and their position, and ensures that there's a cost for grave offenses while in office. Officials regularly receive a salary and old age pension, which is required because the output is not so easily measured to compensate someone with piecework or on commission. The remuneration increases with rank and function. These aspects make the positions desirable, especially considering its stability, and thus holds the incumbent in an even higher social esteem. Generally, an official is set up for a career within the hierarchical order. They generally move from positions of lower authority and salary into higher ones over time. These promotions are based on seniority, but also performance or even external examinations. So this work was published in German in 1920 and translated to English in 1946, which prompted a lot of research in English in the 1950s and 1960s. And it's considered a pretty seminal fundamental work. And despite it being over a century old now, many of these characteristics are still fundamentals of organizational design today, especially for public bureaus.